Hello everybody. The topic of this section is risk management process. The risk management process is a systematic attempt to analyze and deal with risk. The process can be broken down into 5 steps: risk identification, risk assessment, selection of risk management techniques, implementation, and review. In this section, we will discuss these 5 steps mainly. Step 1. Risk identification consists of figuring out what the most important risk exposures are for the unit of analysis, be it a household, a firm, or some other entity. For example, a person who has never missed a day of work because of illness or injury may give little thought to the risk of disability. Buying insurance against the disability risk might make sense, but may not even be considered. Effective risk identification requires that one take the perspective of the entity as a whole and consider the totality of uncertainties affecting it. For example, consider households' exposure to stock market risk. If you work as a stockbroker, then your future earnings depend critically on how well stocks perform. Your human capital is therefore exposed to the performance of the stock market, and you probably should not invest your other non-human capital wealth in stock as well. Step 2. Risk assessment is the quantification of the costs associated with the risks that have been identified in the first step of risk management. For example, if a person identifies illness as a major risk exposure, to assess the exposure, information is needed. How likely is that someone of his or her age and health status will get sick? What is the cost of treatment? In the realm of financial asset risks, households and firms often need expert advice in assessing their exposures and in quantifying the trade-off between the risks and the reward of investing in various categories of assets. They typically turn to professional investment advisors, mutual funds, or other financial intermediaries and service firms that help them make those assessments. The next step, selection of risk management techniques. There are 4 basic techniques available for reducing risk. The first one, risk avoidance, which is a conscious decision not to be exposed to a particular risk. People may decide to avoid the risk of going into certain professions, and firms may avoid certain lines of business because they are considered too risky. The second one, loss prevention and control, are actions taken to reduce the likelihood or the severity of losses. Such actions can be taken prior to, current with, or after a loss occurs. The next one, risk retention, means absorbing the risk and converting losses out of one's own resources. This sometimes happens by default. For example, when one is unaware that there was any risk or one chooses to ignore it. But one may make a conscious decision to absorb certain risks. For example, some people may decide to absorb the costs of treating illnesses from their own accumulated wealth and do not buy health insurance. The last one, risk transfer, means transferring the risk to others. Selling a risky asset to someone else and buying insurance are examples of this technique of risk management. There are methods of accomplishing the transfer of risk: hedging, insuring, and diversifying. The next step of risk management process is implementation. Following a decision about how to handle the risks identified, one must implement the techniques selected. The underlying principle in this step of risk management process is to minimize the cost of implementation. For example, if you decide to buy health insurance of a certain kind, you should shop around for the lowest cost provider. If you have decided to invest in the stock market, you should compare the costs of doing so through mutual funds or buying stocks through a broker. The last step of risk management process is review. Risk management is a dynamic feedback process in which decisions are periodically reviewed and revised. As time passes and circumstances change, new exposures may arise. Information about the likelihood and severity of risks may become more readily available, and the techniques for managing them may become less costly. That's all about 5 steps. In summary, in this section, we have discussed 5 steps in risk management process: risk identification, risk assessment, selection of risk management techniques, implementation, and review. That's all about this section. Bye.